Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, this afternoon we're going to do something a little bit different, something that I haven't actually done before. Well, I've tasted it before, but I've done an episode of the show on tequila, and it's well overdue in my opinion. So, firstly, I'd just like to say a really big thank you to Specialty Brands for the samples for today's tasting. As you can see, nice generous big ones, which is always nice. Can't complain about that. So right, tequila. Now I've not tasted a huge amount of tequila. I am not a tequila nut. I'm not a nerdy kind of tequila person. Although I do know what good spirit tastes like, so I think I can pretty accurately judge the quality of any given spirit. Whether I know sort of a huge amount about it or not. But anyway, so it's going to be quite fascinating. I do enjoy tequila, and unfortunately, a lot of people. It has one of these kind of associations. Tequila slammers, students getting pissed, lime and salt and dreadful tequila, and everybody goes, "Oh, I hate tequila," I've had a bad experience with it and all this kind of stuff. But it's like any spirit, you certainly get your mass-produced, shall we say, somewhat industrial products, and you get obviously the sort of traditional, sort of high-end, classy stuff, which which we're looking at this afternoon, funnily enough. Anyway, so there's a lot of, not ignorance is the wrong word, but a lot of sort of like unknowns about tequila. Firstly, tequila is a mezcal. Now, mezcal is the kind of overriding name for a spirit made from agave. Okay, look at it as like whiskey, for example. So you have whiskey as the overall kind of terminology, the name for the product. But if it comes from Speyside, you can call it Speyside. And the same goes for tequila. Tequila has to be produced in the province of Jalisco, where the town of Tequila is. Then you can call it tequila. If it's produced outside of Jalisco, it's mezcal. I mean, mezcal does have its own series of DOs and what have you, but obviously, as we're not looking at mezcal, I'm not going to really go into that. But anyway, so a little bit of background information, a little bit of history. Feel free to fast forward this if you know it already. First off, the plant that tequila is made from, the agave, it looks like a cactus for all intents and purposes, and you would have thought it is a cactus, but apparently it's not a cactus. It is actually a member of the lily family, surprisingly enough. When they're harvested, I'll go on to the production methods when we get there, but when they're harvested and they produce a rough beer from sort of like the fermented juice, it's called pulp, and apparently this dates back to the Aztecs. Apparently there is information somewhere or other, God only knows where, that it was apparently first introduced by the Aztecs somewhere between 1172 and 1291 AD. Now, apparently they used to really get off on this stuff. They'd get their sacrifices completely smashed out of their faces on this stuff, and then top them, the top of ziggurats, and leave the sacrifices for the gods and all that kind of stuff. And apparently it was only up after the Spanish invasion. I was about to say Spanish Inquisition then for a minute. No, the Spanish invasion. That the Moors brought the distillation techniques to Mexico, and then it started to, this was around about 800 AD apparently, and then obviously this rough pulp was then distilled into the forerunner to mezcal, tequila. Apparently the first recorded plantation in Jalisco was in 1600 and was founded by a chap called Don Pedro Sanchez de Tagala, who was apparently the governor of what it was called Nova Galicia, then during as a throwback to Spanish times. it was, it's tequila mezcal has been pretty popular. It was very popular in the States apparently during Prohibition, where it was smuggled over the Mexican border into the States, and ever since then, it's they're sort of it kind of has its moments. It's like a lot of these sort of slightly left field spirits, I suppose. They have their kind of moments, and although I wouldn't say that certainly for us that tequila is a huge seller, we do sell a bit of it, and it's an interesting product. So basically, what you have is you have this plant, the agave plant, and the idea is pretty simple, really. It's just like growing barley. The idea is to sort of obviously get the thing, as full of carbohydrates as you can possibly get before turning those carbohydrates into sugar, which you then ferment and then you distill. But it's a slightly more interesting kind of way of going about it, because basically they select these plants when they're growing, and decide effectively what they have to do is castrate the plant. Apparently, this is all very sexual, this kind of tequila thing. They do it with big proddy sticks and all that kind of stuff, and they chop them open and remove the developing flower stem. So the whole point is that it just keeps filling up with carbohydrate, but it has nothing to do with it, nothing to do with all this energy. It's a bit like taking barley. You basically you seep the barley to sort of like get the germination going, but obviously you don't want it to start to germinate, because that's when it turns it starts to use up its latent energy to grow a stem. So you don't want that. So you remove the stem, and then the agave is kind of left for anywhere between sort of 6 and 18 months to sort of effectively become a reservoir, if you like, of carbohydrates. When they decide that it's harvest time, they're basically hacked off at the bottom, taken to the distillery, where they start off excuse me, their process of being turned into tequila. First off, they're baked in large ovens, or traditionally this would have essentially been a hole in the ground which they just put hot rocks on top of. The baking can take anywhere between sort of 3 and 5 days. Again, it's to sort of turn the complex sugars into more simpler sugars, which then can obviously be fermented, etc., etc. The pinas, as they're called, in this state, are then ground. Again, traditionally this is done in what's called a tahoma, which is basically a kind of a large round area made of stone, with a stone on top of it, which is dragged around by a donkey, and it just basically crushes them all off. It's incredible archaic stuff, or traditional, I think is probably the better term to use. So it's all crushed up, so you then get all this kind of juice and stuff, which is then obviously watered down. I think they put about 10% water with it, and fermented. The fermentation can last anywhere between 24 hours and 10 days, basically, depending upon how slowly and how the sort of character that you want to sort of like get into this basic beer solution. And then it's basically time for distilling. It's distilled once to around about 22%, when it can be termed as ordinary tequila. But then obviously second distillation takes it up to sort of closer to the bottling strength. I think they sort of try and run it off around about sort of 50, 55, 60%, and that's essentially it. That's kind of your potted production of tequila. There are two different types of tequilas, and we're not talking about mezcal tequila, we're talking about tequila. You basically you have your 100% agave tequila, which is the creme de la cremes, the kind of what we're tasting this afternoon, and then you have sort of like mixto tequila, or bastardized tequila, as a lot of people call it, which legally has to have a minimum of 51% agave in to be called that, and you can use all whatever other sugars you want to use in it. So So right, that's essentially it. I mean, I could go on forever and a day about the methods and all that kind of stuff, but we'll be here forever and a day basically. So anyway, let's introduce what we're tasting today and the lineup. Right, okay, so today we're going to be looking at Tapatio Tequila, Tapatio being one of the brands that is produced by the La Alteña distillery. Now, the distillery itself was set up by a gentleman whose surname I've been struggling with for about the last 10 minutes to say properly, so I'm just going to give it a shot, and if it's wrong, it's wrong. I've stopped this thing too many times to keep doing it. Don Felipe Camanera. Yeah, Don Felipe, alright, that's the guy's name. Anyway, so they founded a distillery, or his family, should we say, founded the distillery sometime in the 1800s, although the family distillery was destroyed sometime during the Mexican Revolution of 1910, 1920. Apparently, I don't know whether that was directly due to it or whether, I've only got a limited amount of information. So he basically began his career by buying and selling and what have you, the actual agave plants to other producers, and in 1937 opened his own distillery, the La Alteña distillery, and basically making damn good tequila ever since. Well, he hasn't. I mean, he's passed it down to his kids, and I think it's now been controlled by 2 daughters and a son, I believe, and it's all traditional. I mean, yes, there are modern ways of making tequila. There are sort of modern equipment, presses, and there's sort of like more modern ovens and what have you that are far more efficient. And I suppose if you're producing sort of like vast quantities of spirit that you just want to sort of like get through, then fine. There's always an industrial process at the heart of a lot of spirits, but obviously the more traditional spirits just tend to have that little bit more interest. So, but anyway, let's talk about the range and what we're going to be tasting this afternoon. I finally got onto that part. Yes. So as you can see, there is 5 different bottlings in the range. We'll be kicking off with the Blanco. This is bottled at 40% and is completely unaged. It's basically as it comes off the still, cut with water. Sometimes they can be rested. You can rest white tequila in cask for a few months just to basically soften things up, and certainly some producers do that. The second bottling we'll be looking at is apparently a limited edition version of the white. This is called the 110, which is bottled at 55%. So it'll be interesting to see if that gets more pungent with the extra alcohol. Who knows? Third bottling we'll be looking at is the Reposado, bottled at 38%. The Reposado spends 11 months in charred oak. When they rest the tequila prior to sort of bottling it for white, it's often rested in completely uncharred oak casks, so obviously it doesn't really get any oak character. You might get a little bit, but nothing of any great amount, shall we say. The next bottling we're looking at is the Anejo, which is also bottled at 38% and spends between 24 and 32 months, again aging in charred oak casks. And finally, we'll be looking at this baby. Look at the colour of that, will you? This is the Excellencia Gran Reserva, bottled at 40% and spends a whopping 3 to 5 years in the cask. So that's going to be bloody interesting. That's all I can say. I have tasted the Tapatio range before, and that was about 2 years ago, I think now, when I sort of started stocking, because anyway, I'll tell you the reason why when we start tasting. Anyway, so that's enough waffle. You'd be glad to know. Let's taste some tequila then, shall we? And no, there's no salt and there's no lime. Right, okay, so let's kick off this little tasting with the Blanco. Let's see what the nose gives us then, shall we? Now that is lovely. Now, tequila and mezcal, it has this kind of what I describe as a pulped fruit character, and it's kind of a fleshy white fruit note. It's got some lovely sweetness to it, quite salty. I mean, I'm guessing this is where, and lime notes as well, and I'm guessing this is the whole thing about the salt and the lime. It's basically you take crap tequila that has no character, and then you sort of lick some salt, drink some lime and some tequila. So, you know, you're just trying to put flavours into it, you know. So brilliant, great tequila, you don't need all of that, it's got the character in it already. Slightly smoky, it's got a kind of an earthy smokiness, and certainly, again, this is a characteristic that comes through with the more traditional tequilas. I mean, certainly if you go almost to the point of, you know, cooking them in pits in the earth, you know, literally, it's obviously going to absorb all of that kind of character. Lovely freshness, clean, fleshy, like I said, sort of got lovely pulped character, a little bit of pepper. That is just a lovely spirit. I mean, you know, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's tequila or vodka or gin or what have you. This is just a lovely spirit, just really quite complex, fresh, and just really pleasant. Palate. Lovely citric finish there, real crisp citrus character. Again, it's just lovely, fleshy, full, pulped white fruit, bit of spice, well, more pepper than spice I would say. A little bit of smoke, sort of, again, kind of slightly sooty kind of earthy smoke. Bit of quite salty aftertaste in actual fact, along with that sort of citrus note. It kind of really cleans up the palate nicely. It's just got such a lovely balance of kind of sweetness and bitterness and sourness. That is just a lovely tequila. And I mean, like I said at the beginning of the show, I've not tasted a million tequilas. I've tasted a fair few, and they seem to kind of broadly fall into, to me, two kind of categories. You've got a very traditional style of tequila, which is what this is, with that sort of earthy sort of intensity, and then you have, shall we say, the more softer, rounder, probably more commercial style of tequila. Not that I'm saying that one is better than the other, but just from my own personal kind of tasting, that's what I found. And I must admit, I do love the traditional sort of intensity of the Tapatio, certainly the white. So yeah, very, very good. Right, okay, so let's take a look at the 110 then. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Now, I would have expected it to be more pungent, given the slightly higher alcohol content, but it's a lot subtler. I'm wondering whether this has actually been rested in oak, because it has a little bit of a vanilla character. I mean, judging by the sort of colour, one would say no, and I can't imagine that they age it and strip the colour out. Not if they're sort of, you know, as we know, a very traditional distiller. So it's interesting where that sort of slight vanilla note comes from. It's a little bit more citric, a little bit crisper, subtler, not quite as intense, but it's still got some of that fleshy agave fruit, some pepper. Almost sort of whiskey-ish like, you know, certainly that vanilla note, and the sweetness is almost like a barley sweetness, which is quite interesting. So like I said, I'm wondering whether this is actually rested in casks for a few months. But either way, it's like I said, subtler. There's a little bit more perfume note coming out now. Palate. Oh, it's got a peppery finish. Well, it's kind of ramped up the intensity of the peppers. It certainly has. A little bit green pepper as well, you know, sort of, along with the black pepper. Almost Szechuan pepper. It's really spicy. Oh, wow, what a finish. That is great. Again, it's kind of subtler, it's softer. Not quite so fleshy, a little bit more citric. You sort of think to beginning with, it's not really going anywhere, and then you swallow it and suddenly it's like, oh, Spice City, that is really impressive. Yeah, that is very, very good tequila. Okay, so let's move on to the Reposado. This, like I said, gets about 11 months in charred oak, so let's see what difference that makes to it. Well, first off, is a subtle smoky oak character. It's not quite so pungent, it's not quite so raw. Obviously, that's the oak has sort of removed, you know, some of the impurities in the spirit. It's a lot more rounder, it's softer. Still, it's quite peppery. There's still some lovely fruit there. But obviously, as the oak is adding sort of like the vanillins, it is kind of like sort of taking away some of the sort of like the fresher element of the unaged spirit, but still very, very good. Palate. Lot subtler, mellower. The oak is obviously having that effect on it. It's adding a little bit of vanilla, like on the nose. Again, quite weighty and fleshy. Some lovely pepper notes on the finish. Not quite so intense. Obviously, it's only bottled at 38%. So it's really soft, really easy going, easy to drink. Probably too easy, I imagine. Yep, nicely citric again. Rounded, full. Yeah, that again is absolutely delightful. Really, really nice. Right, okay, so let's take a look at the Anejo. Like I said, this gets between 24 and 32 months in oak, so let's see what those give us then, shall we? More oak, obviously, that was to be expected. More vanilla, more smoky, charred oak notes. It's quite honeyed, it's got sort of a honey character. I mean, I don't know whether they make agave honey or not, but it certainly sort of smells like agave honey, if they ever made it, if you see what I mean. Again, subtly peppered. Some nice fleshy character, but again, it's all very mellow, and the oak is all sort of like, you know, giving it that kind of lovely vanilla sort of honey coating. It's really very, very nice. Slightly earthy, a little bit of dustiness coming through. But again, sort of like, yeah, it's all very harmonious. Sweetness is balancing that, and the citrus is balancing the sweetness, and yeah, that's a lovely nose. Palate. Really soft, really elegant. Lots of lovely sort of almost toffeed oak, but again the sort of like the spicy pepperiness of the agave certainly kind of comes through on the finish. Again, all right, it hasn't got quite the intensity of the unaged, but it's certainly got plenty of character that kind of stands up to all that oak. Again, very full, weighty, fleshy, wonderfully mellow. This is, you know, definitely a sort of like a drink that you could just sip and just really enjoy. It's just so nicely balanced. So yeah, very good. Okay, so now let's have a look at the Gran Reserva. Now, I mean, as we've just seen, obviously the oak character is becoming progressively more to the fore as we get up the age statement, so to speak. So let's see what 3 to 5 years does. Ooh, now that is really interesting. Lots and lots of crunchy, almost demerara sugar coated dried fruit, which is obviously it's picked up from, you know, the oxidation. Dark vanilla, toffee, a little bit of chocolate even. Not quite, yeah, milk chocolate more than dark chocolate, but some, yeah, dark marzipan, oily, almost starting to get a little bit, you know, medicinal. I certainly remember when I tasted it the first time round, I thought I was actually tasting an agricole rum. It was that pungently medicinal, but this isn't quite so pungent on the sort of medicinal notes. There's a lot more sort of burnt sugar, oak smoke, but underneath it you can just about sense the tequila notes, the pepper, the light spice. But wow, that is just like no tequila I've ever tasted, I can tell you that for a start. Like I said, it's kind of hovering somewhere between a sort of an agricole rum and a tequila. It's just most unusual, it has to be said. Just really deep. I mean, yes, this is pretty expensive. And the bizarre thing is, this is, you know, you would expect, you know, the standard range is all bottled in 50cl bottles. Makes it a really good price. You know, 25 to sort of 30, 40 quid, I think, for the sort of standard sort of stuff. I think it's up to about, I think it's about 50, I think, for the Anejo. And normally you'd expect, you know, the really expensive, luxurious stuff to be bottled in smaller bottles, but no, they bottle it in a litre-sized bottle. They bottle it in a bigger bottle. Yeah, all right. So it's 170 odd quid, but if you ever get the opportunity, at least even just, you know, if you find a you know, one of those kind of bars that has this kind of range of tequilas, then, you know, definitely worth giving it a try, because this is just absolutely sensational. Oh wow, what a finish. Loads and loads of spicy, peppery tequila on the agave on the finish. Kicks off with this big sort of, you know, big oaky kind of character, you know, lots of sort of, you know, oxidized fruit, vanilla, sort of marzipan, dark honey, and then you suddenly sort of get to the finish and all that wonderful tequila flavour comes kind of barreling through, and you just sort of like left with a real fresh, intense, almost as intense as the the Blanco, with that real pepperiness, and a little bit of smoke. Again, it's got that sort of slightly weird medicinal kind of rummy like kind of character. Certainly on the mid palate you get a lot of that kind of herbal kind of juice notes. So it's kind of, it is just got its amazing progression, like I said. I mean, you know, kicking off with the wood and then the herbal notes, and then finally all that fleshy tequila kind of coming through, or the fleshy agave coming through right on the finish. That is just a stunning spirit, no doubt about that whatsoever. What a great way to end a tasting. Right, okay, so let's sum this episode of the show up then, shall we? Well, I think Tapatio Tequila is just absolutely stunning stuff. Really, really good. And I think at the end of the day, it all depends how you like your tequila. If you like your tequila natural as natural can be, then obviously buy the white, you know. And it has all that lovely fleshy tequila, agave character and pepper. If you like it a little bit mellower, a little bit more rounder, then obviously either go for the Reposado or the Anejo. And as we can see, that is what happens. Leaving it in oak does tend to sort of obviously take the sort of edge off the intensity of the agave character, but obviously you're adding a little layer of vanilla and charred oak and that kind of thing. And then you get to the Excellencia, which is like no tequila I've ever tasted, it has to be said. And I remember tasting that the first time round and just going, what in God's name is this? And it's absolutely stunning. I mean, I know everybody's not going to be able to afford it, and you know, it's just one of those things. But I think if you love tequila, then definitely worth seeing if you can get your hands on a dribble or two, because it's pretty impressive stuff. So there you go. That's this week's episode of the show. I hope I haven't bored you to death with too much yapping about tequila and its background, but it's really fascinating stuff at the end of the day. I mean, look it up. Look up the sort of the whole Aztec kind of beginnings and all that kind of stuff, and really interesting stuff. So there you go. That's this week's episode in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope this will tempt you to try tequila, or try good quality tequila, or I should say. It doesn't necessarily have to be Tapatio, but get yourself a good quality tequila, and just it's just such an interesting and unique flavour. So anyway, that's enough for today. So all that's left to say is good dramming and good afternoon.